Because, you know, as a parent, if you're really smart, you'll sit back sometime in these 17, 18 years that you have to reflect as the child grows from this big to bigger. You can say, what is the worst that child could ever do to me? Because if you can figure that out, the child can't control you. Very simple. I sat there for, I think, 18 years thinking about this. And thinking about it a whole lot, especially when she was a teen, because that's when you're sometimes torn between the two things of throwing them out and throwing them back in the cradle, except they're too big to throw back in the cradle.
Hi, beautiful souls. Welcome back to my Journey Faithful Compassion Hub. If you are new here, my name is Beatrice. This channel is a place where we journey together through spiritual reflections inspired by Harold Klemp. Every time I return to one of Harold's talks, I discover something new. Not because the words has changed, but because soul grows through life experiences. Our journey into spiritual freedom continues today. As I listened to the next part of Harold's seminar, another beautiful insight began to unfold. I realized spiritual freedom isn't only about letting go. Sometimes it begins with having the courage to step into experiences that help soul grow. Let's continue the journey together.
They know how to hang on at home, and any parent with any sense of humanity at all cannot simply throw them out the door, even though you realize it may be the best thing to do for both yourself and the children. What does life require of us? To be able to survive, to go out there, have the experiences of life, learn from them, and become better spiritual beings. And by becoming better spiritual beings, becoming more self-sufficient, able to handle ourselves in one crisis after another, and even in the good times, this is moving you towards spiritual freedom in this lifetime. As you have more spiritual freedom, you have more happiness and independence. And this is what we're looking for. Happiness, freedom, and I guess independence is the same word, but in a different way. So my daughter is somewhere up in Alaska now working in a fish cannery. She didn't want to go. I encouraged her very strongly, everything short of buying her a plane ticket, which I let her earn herself. And she said she was going to have $200 or $300 by the time she left. This was at the beginning of June. And I said, are you sure you're going to be able to live on that? Because I was going to help her in case she could make it. She says, yeah, my friends are planning to, she was going with six other friends. She and them equals 7. And she said, oh yeah, they're only planning to have $100 or $200, no, excuse me, $90 or $100. I says, well, then you're doing fine if you're going to have $200 or $300. She says, oh yeah. But I think what she did, she decided to take it easy a few weeks before she left. They spent 2 weeks packing things into a duffel bag. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. A good excuse as any not to go out and work. Just before she left, I talked with her on the phone and she said, yeah, she was ready to go. And I said, how much money do you have? She says, oh, about $100. I said, how much do your friends have? Oh, some of them have $90, some of them have $150 to $200. I said, what happened? It was going to be exactly the other way around when we talked last time. Your plans had you the rich one and them the poor ones. And I said, now you're among the poor ones. I said, what happened? Well, Dad, I had a pack. So when you realize it takes 2 weeks to pack a duffel bag, you aren't going to get anywhere in this argument. So you say, well, listen, if you need any money when you're there, call me. Just don't call me Friday night because there are no banks open or anything over the weekend, so you're going to have a long weekend. Plan ahead, probably call Thursday, okay? But anyway, she's up there in Alaska now, learning all about the insides of fish. And she and a lot of other young people are up there, not for gold, but for the promise of earning $5,000 over the summer so they can go to college in fall. And I told her before she left, I said, do this. Don't stay home Don't stay home, because if you do, you're going to regret this for the rest of your life.
As I listened to Harold Klemp, I found myself reflecting again. One thing I've come to appreciate is that every stage of life seemed to invite Saul into another lesson. When Harold spoke about children eventually leaving home, I realized that he wasn't only speaking about parents and children, he was speaking about growth. Growth often asks us to leave what is familiar. Sometimes we are the child being told to leave the nest. Sometimes we are the parent learning to let go. Neither is easy. Yes, both are necessary if soul is to continue growing. For a moment, I asked myself, how often have I prayed for spiritual freedom while resisting the very experience that could help me grow? We all like comfort. We like what is familiar. We like certainty. Yet life keeps inviting us beyond those places. Sometimes through change, sometimes through disappointments, sometimes through responsibilities we never expected. Harold reminded me that life isn't trying to punish us, but preparing us. Perhaps every new experience is an invitation for soul to become stronger, wiser, and to be a little more free. This gets personal. I smiled when Harold shared a story encouraging his daughter to go to Alaska. In the beginning, I thought it's just a story of a father encouraging his daughter. But when I listened, I realized that the story is about courage. How many opportunities has Saul placed before us only for fear to whisper, "Stay where it is safe"? Growth rarely happens where everything is comfortable. Sometimes Saul needs us to take the journey even when we don't feel completely ready. Because if we always wait until we feel fearless, we may never move at all. Perhaps courage isn't the absence of fear. Perhaps courage is trusting divine spirit to take the next step anyway.
And so she and these other young people, they got their courage from each other. You know, if you look around and you say, okay, pass the hat and see how much bravery or courage there is in this group of 7. Well, any one of them didn't have a whole lot, but if you take them as a group, there was enough to fill a hat. And so it was enough to get them to Alaska. They're up there, and she said in a letter, she wrote a letter actually, because she's so homesick. They're out in this first of the Aleutian Islands. It's like tundra, nothing, no trees, no brush, nothing, just sand and about 9 buildings. 3, 4 dormitories for the students that come up there to process the fish. And then there's a little bitty office and a little cafeteria, and the fish processing plant, which is big. So she's up there, homesick. All her friends are up there, and they don't have any television, no radio. Of course, nobody told him this. And the place is run by Moonies. Okay. So her mother called me after our daughter had left. Her mother lives in Colorado, and she said, "Mooney's up there." I said, yeah, Mooney's up there. There's fish up there too, you know. The kids went up there to get the fish, help clean the fish, and then make money so they can go to school. And of course, the mother, as a good mother will be, was very concerned. She says, "What if they try to change your religion?" I said, "Well, I don't care." I said, if she wants to leave Eckankar, become a Mooney or a Lutheran or a Catholic or a Hindu or anything else, I said, I really don't care. I said, I don't own her.
At first, it sounded like a simple story about 7 friends finding courage to travel together. But the more I reflected on it, the more I realized it wasn't really about Alaska. It's about what happens when fear no longer gets the final word. Sometimes we think courage only belongs to people who aren't afraid. Perhaps courage is something quieter than that. Perhaps courage is simply taking a step even while your heart is still uncertain. One thing I've learned on my spiritual journey is that divine spirit doesn't always remove our fears before asking us to move forward. Sometimes the invitation comes first and the courage grows while we begin walking. That reminded me of something beautiful. There are moments where soul cannot grow by standing still. There are lessons we can only learn by saying yes to life, by trusting, by taking that next step, even if we cannot see where the road will eventually lead. And perhaps that is another beautiful expression of spiritual freedom. Not waiting until we feel completely ready, but trusting divine spirit enough to keep moving. When Harold said, "I don't own her," those words became still in my heart, because I realized that Harold wasn't only talking about his daughter, he was talking about love. So often we believe that loving someone means protecting them from every disappointment, wanting their life to unfold according to our hopes for them. But real love doesn't control another soul's journey. Every soul has its own lesson, its own timing, its own experiences, as difficult as it may be for us to watch. That made me ask myself a very honest question. How often have I prayed for someone else's life to change, when perhaps Divine Spirit was allowing them to experience exactly what their soul needed? That isn't easy to accept, especially if it's someone we love. As parents, as family, as friends, our hearts naturally wants to protect. But Harold reminded me that spiritual freedom also means trusting that Divine Spirit loves them even more than we do. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on tighter. Sometimes it's placing someone gently into God's care, trusting that the same divine guiding your journey is faithfully guiding theirs. That doesn't mean we stop loving them. It means we love with open hands, not closed fists. For me, this was one of the deepest lessons in this part of Harold's talk.
Because, you know, as a parent, if you're really smart, you'll sit back sometime in these 17, 18 years that you have to reflect as the child grows from this big to bigger. You can say, what is the worst that child could ever do to me? Because if you can figure that out, the child can't control you. Very simple. I sat there for, I think, 18 years thinking about this. And thinking about it a whole lot, especially when she was a teen, because that's when you're sometimes torn between the two things of throwing them out and throwing them back in the cradle, except they're too big to throw back in the cradle. And so I realized one day, if she's a daughter worth anything at all, half a mind at all, forget high school grades, but I know she has a good mind, creative. And I said, what she's going to try to do sometime is try to blackmail me and say, I'm going to leave Eckankar, and watch me fall over backward, you know, into dead faint. But I was prepared, you know. So if she's up there in Alaska, and she gets tired of the fish, and she wants to become a Moonie, she wants to come home, become a Catholic or a Lutheran, or she wants to become an atheist, as my dear friend, he had raised a family, 2 sons. One became a Mormon, the other became an atheist. You know, I said, whatever she wants to do is fine. Now, my poor friend, I wrote to him just this last week. I said, you know, it's hard to imagine a person like you who grew up a Baptist, Southern Baptist, and I said, now you have one son who's a Mormon, and I said, another son who's an atheist. I said, this can only happen in an unfair universe when God makes a pact with the devil. And I said, but why you? I'd always known him to be a very generous person. He let people enjoy their religious freedom, even at home. He went to the Baptist church when he felt like it. The kids felt they didn't want to go. He didn't push them. Wonderful example. He's still a Baptist today, I guess, whenever he goes to church, but he's so busy now getting ready for his new Mormon relatives having to have a barbecue for him in August. And he's planning to go away skiing somewhere that weekend. He doesn't know where. There might be a skiing place in August, but he's thinking of it. Finally, he thought he was rid of his children. The atheist is off to Los Angeles to become an actor. And the Mormon got married, and so he's living a very interesting life right now, trying to stay balanced, accept life as he finds it, with joy, not jubilation, which he might, saying, finally, life has seen to rid me of these 2 weights in my balance. So his scales are now, I don't know, in a state of jumping up and down as sometimes one child jumps back on the scale, another jumps off.
Another layer of spiritual freedom began to unfold. It made me realize that spiritual freedom isn't about making another person think like us, or walk like us, or be in the exactly path. Every soul's journey is unique. Sometimes we become so attached to our own understanding that we forget how patiently Divine Spirit has guided us throughout our own lives. Looking back, haven't we all changed? Haven't there been moments when our understanding became deeper than it was before? If Divine Spirit has been patient with us, perhaps we're also being invited to show that same patience towards others. Harold wasn't encouraging indifference, he was encouraging trust. Trust that Divine Spirit knows how to reach every soul, sometimes in a way we could never imagine. Perhaps spiritual freedom isn't only about becoming free ourselves. Perhaps it's also about freeing others to seek, to learn, to grow through their own experiences. That doesn't weaken love. I believe it strengthens it. Because love that depends on control is fragile. But love trusts Divine Spirit. It has no fear. Maybe that is one of the greatest freedom soul can ever discover. Thank you for walking this part of the journey with me today. If something in today's reflection spoke to your heart, I would love to hear from you in the comments. What touched you? What challenged you? And what spiritual lessons are you discovering in your own life? Until next time, please don't forget to like, to share, and subscribe. May the light and sound of God continue guiding your path. I love you all.